But thank you for worship leaders. We have to get trained. We are impatient with silence, but I think that's wonderful time of worshiping together. This is a time of celebration for God's faithfulness in journeying with the Reformed Church, United Reformed Church in this part of the world. I always say the center of this celebration is how faithful God has been with us. This is a time to thank God for the past, hold firm for the possibilities of the present, and hope for the future. I am so grateful to God for the possibility to meet again. I was always wondering, will we be able to? I got the invitation years ago, and I was always wondering, would we really be able to meet? And thank God for this possibility that we could meet, especially after the COVID and all the challenges that we faced and the helplessness that we felt at many times. The pandemic situation has opened our eyes on many challenges and realities that affirmed the need for the church to ask the question, what does the Lord require of us as a church today? What role does the church have today? The pandemic revealed lots of injustices that surrounded us and surrounded the world, whether it's social, political, economic. It exposed inequality, exploitation, oppression that are rooted in economic systems that exploited the dignity of people, where health care and other fundamental rights were only available to those who could afford it. And this is the struggle that we still face as a communion, because there's no justice in the way healthcare is distributed around the world in that. Almost everywhere, the vulnerable, the poor, and the marginalized are the most affected by the disease and by the measures of disease control. Today, we look also at the continued wars, and I was born in the Middle East, lived all my life in war, and I always say, when will it stop? And lately, I was so discouraged to see that the same story happening in Ukraine. How long? How long we will continue to speak war language? I know in the Middle East we are tired of it, and now we are very troubled with what's happening with Ukraine, with the children that are scared, with the mothers that they are losing their children, the more instability. And that leaves us with more questions. What can we do? How can we celebrate as a church in the midst of all the suffering? How can we be an impactful church today? And this is what we are called for, to make a difference, to really change things around us. Mary and Joan were celebrating their 30th anniversary, wedding anniversary. They worked hard to make this night a special night. After checking on the best restaurants in town, they found a nice restaurant. The reservation was made at 7 at night, and they made sure that they got the best table in that restaurant. But John got caught in meetings, and he was late. Well, Mary was angry. The couple reached late to their anniversary dinner, and they were tense and troubled. Angela, the waiter, noticed that they were not well. She approached the table and offered them 2 glasses of wine. "We didn't order that," Mary said. I understand how Mary feels. I know, said Angela. I just felt that you were not feeling well and just wanted to offer this for you freely. That waitress was hospitable. She was not merely serving the couple, doing things in the proper way, but rather she was living hospitality, caring for how they feel. She was thinking about them, their frustration, and how she can create positivity, a better situation. When we talk about hospitality, we are thinking of others and how they feel. In the world of hotelier, and this is a word that comes from the hotel's life, there is a difference between service and hospitality. In service, we are interested to present what we learned. For example, to serve people, you learn that you give the plate from one side, you collect it from the other side, you don't overreach. These are services that you are taught in that. In hospitality, we are concerned how people feel. And there is a difference between service and hospitality. You could go to a restaurant and you will be served, but you will not feel the hospitality many times. Hospitality, service is to practice what you were taught. Hospitality is to think of how people feel. Service is about you and what you learned. Hospitality is about others and how they feel. Hospitality is not about them. Hospitality is about them, not us. And this is the difference between service and hospitality. Service, we're always thinking of what we learned, while hospitality, what they feel. It is not merely service, but rather a way to make people happy, respected, dignified. It's stepping into their shoes and trying to lessen their struggle and pain and make them feel better and even get over their struggles or misery. So even in the world in hotels, there's quite a difference, service and hospitality. I took the courage to take two texts from the Bible that talk about hospitality. And really, this concept changed my thinking about how I serve and how am I called to serve. The two stories are well-known stories, and they are put one after the other. The story of the Good Samaritan in Luke 10:25, and the story of Mary and Martha. And these are two stories that come side by side in chapter of Luke 10. These are interesting stories and challenging texts to understand hospitality. The two stories are side by side, and we know the first story, they are both well known to us, so I will not read them, but the first story speaks about a man who was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. This is what the situation of the priest. So too, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw the man, passed on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day, he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper, looked after him. The Samaritan, in this story, we have the three people, the priest, the Levite, and the Samaritan. The one who was hospitable was the Samaritan. The Samaritan was the hospitable one, while the priest and the Levite were far from hospitality. Henry Newman, a Catholic priest, well known, says in his book, Reach Out, hospitality is a fundamental attitude towards our fellow human beings. It means to create a free space where the stranger can enter and become a friend instead of an enemy. His hospitality is not to change people, but to offer them space where change can take place, where spiritual formation and growth as well. So hospitality is this free space where the stranger can enter and become a friend instead of an enemy. The church is called to be hospitable, to create this new space. And I think with the Samaritan dealing with this injured man, he got into a new space, probably, that he never expected that. Where we are renewed by hospitalities. When we get into these new spaces, we are renewed in hospitalities. And I want to, as we are thinking, when we think of strangers, many times we only think of refugees or of people. There could be some strangers where we disagree in our thinking. There could be some strangers who don't speak our same language. There could be some strangers who challenge us in our life. There could be some strangers who are found in another church. There could be, so this is hospitality, is to create a new space, a new free space where we come together and explore new reality, where we dare to be in a new space, where we accept the invitation to the table set by God, and we are invited and inviting, where we are changed, and also the invitee. In this new space, the people who are changed are both those who are inviting and those who are invited as well. I think the coronavirus has created distancing, self-centeredness. It's amazing when we look back, and I hope that one day we will say, this is from the past, where you love people by being away from them. You love your family by not visiting them. Wow. You love your parents, even you don't attend their funeral. This coronavirus has created distancing, self-centeredness, fear from the other. It is time where we are called to work again on hospitality, inviting the struggling and the marginalized around us. In the story of the Good Samaritan, the Samaritan was ready to create a free space, to meet a stranger, to learn from this new encounter. If you interviewed the Samaritan before the encounter, he would have never guessed that he would end up helping a person who's a foreigner, putting him on his donkey, brought him to an inn, and paid his money for his recovery. When we get to this free space, we are changed. And the people who are helped are changed. I think the person who was robbed, he was changed himself, and the Samaritan was changed. The Good Samaritan and the wounded were both changed. Our task as a church is to create this free space and learn more about God encounter. According to the first story, hospitality is to go outside the circle, outside the safety zones that we have created, outside the regular, and to feel with the pain of the people and to act accordingly, trusting that God will change us in this new space. What is strange in the story is that those who were supposed to be hospitable missed it. And the Samaritan, who was not requested to be hospitable, he's the one who was. And I always, ask myself this question as I serve and as I go around the communion. Are we missing the point? Because in this story, the priest missed it. Probably he didn't have a decision taken by a committee to help. And sometimes we are very much into our circles that we miss opportunities of reaching out in that. At the same time, this opportunity opened a new way of thinking for the person who was helping. Hospitality is to take the risk in stepping into new space, and I believe this is the same risk that Jesus took as he was incarnated in our humanity. God became human, a risk of getting into this free space. The Samaritan was the hospitable one, while the priest and the Levite were far from hospitality. We go now to the story of Mary and Martha. And this is another story about hospitality, and it's strange as well. It raises strange points. Mary and Martha, which in this story, if you read it fast, you discover that Martha was the hospitable one. Martha symbolizes the model of hospitality, who was welcoming Jesus in her house and serving him with the Middle Eastern hospitality, to the extent that she was distracted with much serving, and she came to Jesus complaining. Her sister came and said, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her to help me." I understand very well Martha's feeling. My husband says, every time we have a visitor, you're so anxious. And he's calmer than me on that. I want to check that the bathrooms are clean and everything is clean. And really, it ends up being an anxious experience where my husband knows how to enjoy it more. But this is the Middle Eastern hospitality, We are worried that, everything is fine. Probably this is our talent as women with hospitality. Tiring talent sometimes, okay. But what was shocking is that despite all, Jesus was not happy with Martha's hospitality. "Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things. One thing is needful. And Martha has chosen the good portion which shall not be taken away. Mary has chosen the good portion which shall not be taken away from her." What's wrong with Jesus? He's supposed to like this hospitality. But this is where is this really the same hospitality that we think of? What do we learn from this story about hospitality? Hospitality is not mere actions. As we open a soup kitchen, a cafe for refugees, give them food and housing. Rushing from one task to another, and I think we all do this. Activities. But rather, with what spirit do we do hospitality? Affects the impact of hospitality. And I think Jesus was bothered with Martha because she was moving from one thing to another, and the way she was anxious, it's how the spirit that we do this hospitality impacts people. Hospitality is not an act of pity, but is rooted in our faith. It's not mere actions, but rather with what spirit we do hospitality affects the impact of hospitality. It is the action that we do. And I discovered this. I've been around our churches, where many of our churches have done lots of work to the refugees, for example. But you find that despite all this encounter, there isn't real hospitality. Because sometimes we don't understand what's going on. We're doing all this to the people, and they're not appreciative. And I know, we notice this, in Lebanon, we have a very big crowd of Syrians in our country. We had around 1 million, and they have Syrians. At a time, we are a country with around 5 million. And I remember, whatever we do, they're not comfortable. Because the question is how we do it. It's not what we do. It's what spirit that we do it. It's not a troubled experience. And this is the question. Is this a troubled experience? And this should be answered by the other, not by us. Many times we do activities through our eyes. Hospitality is to see how they feel. And I think, this is the question with dealing with any stranger, because many times we focus on our work and we forget how the other feels about it to be a troubled experience. And I think this is why this story highlights the importance of how we do hospitality, not what we do. And through this space, we discover that God shapes us. In the Presbyterian Church, we, as I mentioned, all of a sudden, we had a big crowd of children in Lebanon who had no schooling, Syrian children. And I remember at the beginning, the government tried to get some of these kids and teach them. But many of the kids remained on the streets. So as a church, Presbyterian, proper, organized, we said we have to serve these kids. And you should see the objection that came out of some of our congregations. Some of them said, this is not our task. This should be the task of the government or the international community or somebody else. Imagine we went to one village to start a school for the Syrian refugee children, and the whole village was against us. Even the church that's not politically involved became politically involved and got everybody involved, but they don't want these children. Why? They could stay here. Why? They could steal our trees. And that took us time till we moved, and we had to move to another village and start a ministry with these children. I tell you, this ministry, serving the Syrian children in Lebanon, has shaped us as a church. Now we have 7 schools. It was a new experience that we have learned as a church, how to be the church, how to go to the children and hear their stories. They were teaching us. It was a new free space where the children changed and we changed as a church as well. I remember the first day when the children came to our camp, to our school, they came from camps. And it was a time for our teachers to take care of them, to give them a good bath, and to help them. In the evening, when they're supposed to go back to the camp, the teachers became very emotional. Why do they need to go back to the camp? We have taken care of them. I want to tell you many stories that have shaped us as a proper Presbyterian church, where we discovered to live, to be the children of God today, is to love every child as if that child is a child of God, and not as if that child is a child of God. And I want to say that this ministry taught us that to be the church, we have to be on the streets. To be the church, this is how you share the gospel. This is how we learn to share the gospel. Unless we are ready to cross to new spaces, to grow, we do not grow as Christians. I want to tell you, many of our young people would come and say, oh, the church has become boring. And I think because we don't have new spaces. I tell you, I'm very reformed. I love organization. I love things to be done, and that's wonderful. But I have learned that's not enough. Unless we are moved into the spirit of hospitality in our ministry, we cannot grow as a church. This is why many people got involved with these schools. Many people find that the church is interesting, that they can have a new ministry in that. In this ministry, sometimes when we open these new opportunities for free spaces, it's not to change people, but to offer them a space and offer ourselves a space where change can take place, spiritual growth and transformation. So we go to this ministry not because we think that we can change the people, but I think this is an open space where together we are changed in that. Hospitality is not an act of pity. And this is why the question, what spirit we do hospitality? And this is why people believe us or not, if we are really hospitable or not. I have some discussions with my Muslim friends in Lebanon. They say, Najla, sometimes we feel that Christians are aloof. And he said, even when you try to be humble, you look aloof. And this is really, although I always wonder, our Christ died on a cross, and we are aloof. And probably as Protestants, more aloof sometimes. But this is the question, is that it's not an act of pity. It's rooted in our faith. And thank you for the Bible study this morning, we don't own anything. I think we recognize it in difficult times. The corona taught us that we don't own anything. All of a sudden, people just left. And this is why all that we have should be God's. And everything that the ministry is not for ourselves. It's not a service for us. It's hospitality. It's for them. And this is what humbles us, that we always feel that, we learn to do things differently. One of the people yesterday in the discussion, they said, how do you feel as you travel around the communion? I said, every time I travel, I feel I know less. I feel that I really don't understand. And I have learned to get into these free spaces and help the people teach me about how to be the church for today and how to say, Lord, teach me. How would the African community taught me a lot, the people in Latin America, the people in the Middle East, the people in Iraq, taught me a lot. I remember in one of the trips to Iraq, and Philip was with us, the World Community of Reformed Churches with the Presbyterian Church, PCUSA, had an important visit to the church in Iraq. And I remember the wife of the pastor in Kirkuk called me in the morning. And she said, Najla, would you like to go with me to the prison? We have a ministry as women with the prison. In the morning, We got at 6 o'clock in the car that takes prisoners usually. Got in that car, got the food that we need to go to provide for the prisoners. And I got, the day before, the pastor told me that the prison had a problem of infection, that they had to burn all the mattresses and get new ones. So I said, it's okay, this happened, it's okay, now things are fine. I said, go see what we are doing. I get into the prison, and then the person who's in charge, he says, please, can you have breakfast with us? I said, yes, I'll have breakfast. That was easy. Then he said, would you like to get into one of the cells? I said, yes. I got in, and this is my first experience in a prison. I got inside, and one of the women was very hospitable. She said, come sit near me on the mattress. And I sat near that woman, and all of a sudden, I see 3 children that were born in prison. 3 children in the prison in Iraq that were waiting for the milk from the church to give them in their visits. That free space challenged me. Challenged me as a communion. What are we doing? Challenged me as a person serving. How would these children feel to grow? You know, to be born first with mothers who were attacked, and to grow in prison. How would these children understand justice one day? How would these children understand love of Christ one day? The church, all that the church did was to go get inside, bring milk for the children, help around 26 women sitting in a very small room with bathrooms with no curtains, with no air conditioning, with no windows. And that experience just challenged me. Where are we as a church? What do we do? That free space challenges us. It's not a pity. It's rooted in our faith. And this is what we are challenged every day. It's not a troubled experience, as I mentioned, but experience where we ask our Lord, what do you need from us? And how do you want us to live our faith? Hospitality is one way to cure the world from radical, exclusive attitudes. I want to say, unfortunately, the world has become with lines. And this is more, the more we are so scared to travel today because of this separation with this exclusive, radical attitudes around the world. I was thinking, what would heal the world? Probably hospitality. To meet on the level of human beings. It changes us all. As a Lebanese who grew in war, I remember we used to hide in the shelters. In the shelters, you are not a Christian or a Muslim. You are a person. And that experience taught us how to meet other people in that, how to be able to cross these free spaces so that we can heal the world from what's happening today with radicalism. As leaders, we are challenged with the concept of hospitality. We are called to recognize that we have received the hospitality of Christ. And we are living our leadership role in the church due to this hospitality. The hospitality starts with Christ, who has invited us. As leaders, we are invited ourselves to the table of hospitalities. We reflect this hospitality in our paradigm of leadership. This is why, as leaders, we have to present this hospitable style of leadership, where we are not the lords of the table. We discover that those who are invite, we are not the ones. Any table, it's a table set by Christ. And we are not the lords of the table, but we are invited as well. And we will always learn from what God offers us around the table. I think this is where we feel these opportunities, going to the prison, meeting a refugee, meeting a neighbor that you have never talked to, all these are tables that the Lord has prepared for us. We sit in this free space to learn anew how to be the church. I know this sounds tiring, but it is indeed. If we were to be the church of today, we cannot stay in isolation. We cannot stay with borders. We are called to go to the table, even when that table could challenge us as individuals, as churches, and as a country sometimes. We are not centered around what we understand, our hospitality, but we are open to learn how to live our leadership. So this is why the paradigm changes according to the need of the people, where God sends us. We continually seek change, and I want to say the continual change that we grow with as Reformed is a blessing. Because we believe that God wants us to change, to look more day after day like our Christ. And we are not scared of change. And I think this is yesterday we talked about the inheritance. I think that's a wonderful inheritance, a way of thinking that, yes, to change, our strength is not in the past. Our strength in the present and the future. And I always say God did not finish with us today. This is why God is shaping us to be in the future. So some people get scared. They want to go back. But we are called to keep on going so that till we look like our Lord. We become attentive to hear God's voice in our circumstances as God opens our eyes to new styles of leadership. And I think today our churches, they thirst for these leaders that are ready to go to new spaces. They thirst, our congregations, we have the same struggle with numbers, I want to say. So I come from a church that has the struggle with numbers. And I always say, unless the church, we have leadership that's ready to take new steps, people do not feel motivated with this newness, with this God's work. And yesterday I heard the word, the church is the event of the Spirit. And this is where God takes us to a new understanding about our ministry and about ourselves and about our difficulties in that. I want to say, as a church in Lebanon and Syria, we learned, as I mentioned, to go outside the walls of the church. And the church in Syria today probably is a better church than it was before the war. One pastor in Aleppo told me, Najla, I used to spend 15 hours preparing my sermon. Now I spend 15 hours finding gas for a woman who could not cook for her family. The church has a ministry of providing water, drinking water, which we never thought of. I want to say in Lebanon today, with the economic crisis that we are going through, the devaluation of the currency have brought poverty to our streets of Lebanon. And personally, I never thought that Lebanon will ever face such an economic crisis. For example, a teacher who used to earn $1,000 or a principal who used to earn $4,000, his salary and her salary is $200. Our teachers can hardly have enough money to fill their cars with gas so that they can go to school. we receive 2 hours of electricity. So all you make, the money that you make, the salary, can hardly provide your electricity bill. All these challenges. And as a church, thank God that we have started in 2018 a diaconal arm for the church, Compassion Protestant Society. Because I said, if we didn't have this NGO, we would have been only preaching. And now we have a new ministry of feeding the people, which we never thought that this could be part of our ministry in Lebanon. We have a ministry to provide just medication for people who cannot afford medication. And the worst part of the story that we have in Lebanon today, if you have saved your money in the bank, forget about them, they are stuck. So the people who have saved their money to secure give them security when they get older, discovered now that they have no money. I remember one of the principals of our schools who used to work in the Gulf. He was a wealthy man, came back, and he used to help the teachers for emergencies. This same person came to my office and he said, Najla, I am poor. My money is stuck in the bank. The salary of my wife, who is less than $100, can hardly pay us for our electricity. And he said, I don't know what to do. Imagine, with all this chaos, you want to be the church there. And every day I look and say how God provides new opportunities to serve. And I tell you, we are strengthened as a church despite all. First, we don't feel we are alone. We are shocked with what happened. We have our partners, and as I'm meeting here, our partners are meeting in Lebanon. But it is this challenge to go outside the walls. I remember during the COVID, people will call us and they say, my wife is dying. She needs a medicine. And I remember one day I started to call one pharmacy, I did the other. And then I found that medicine. And I held it to my husband, who's also a pastor. I said, Joseph, this is the gospel. This is the gospel. We cannot just speak words, but it's how we live. And we have learned as a church to go outside the walls. As leaders, we are challenged to create new spaces of hospitality. As leaders, we are called for new ways to be creative. And you know what? Many times God surprises us in this new free space. As a church, some of you know that we newly started to invite women pastors to the table. We have, in 2017 was the first time that the Synod ordained women in the Middle East. And we have 3 women who are ordained now in Lebanon. And last month, we have 1 woman who was ordained in Syria. Despite all this chaos, a table of hospitality, of blessings, of that God is working through us. And it surprises you. The place that we ordained the women in Syria is probably the most conservative place in Syria. And you know what? Even if I go, I should go with long sleeves. Even men have to go there with long sleeves. And I tell you, she has a wonderful ministry. And God is using her in this. I remember when I had my exam to be ordained, they asked me the question, if we were to ordain you, what will happen with our relation with Muslims? What will happen with our relations with Orthodox? What will happen with our relation with Catholic Church around us? When I was ordained, I received a letter written by hand, but by a sheikh from Aleppo, congratulating me on my ordination. And it seems he did not dare to type it. He wrote it by hand. New spaces Even one other person in Aleppo has read about the World Communion of Reformed Churches and wrote me a letter of congratulations. Even in Tripoli, which is a very conservative, we had the first woman who was ordained there. New spaces, and God surprises us today. If we want to be surprised as a church, we have to go to live hospitality. If we want to be revived as a church, we are called to live hospitality, to create a new free space where we are changed and the invited people are changed. It is this God working in our midst, God making difference through that. I wonder what's the time now? Oh, it is. I have still 5 minutes, right? Probably I can leave some time for questions or anything like that. I hope I did not go long. Thank you. Hospitality, not service. I'm afraid that we are doing service many times, not hospitality. Yes.
I think we have all the right answers in radical welcome and priesthood of all believers, and I found your talk inspiring about hospitality. I've been a minister in London, which is a very diverse community, for many years. And sometimes it all works. But sometimes what I see is that in meetings, people are overlooked. Yeah? Their contribution is ignored or cut over, or there's silence when they've spoken. This happens to young people, happens to women,
Yes.
and it happens to black people.
Yeah.
So what I'm concerned about at the moment is how can we change that dynamic? How can we make everybody who want to be part have a voice? Because it's not an equal playing field. It's just not there.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Because this is why I stress the table is the Lord's table. Nobody should feel, whether he's a man or a woman or white or black, that we control the table. And I tell you, every time, yesterday we were reflecting about the richness of our churches. We have lost the belief in this richness. And yes, priesthood of all believers is now what the other churches are struggling with. I work with the Catholic Church. I'm on a board that we are preparing for a synod for women in the Catholic Church in Lebanon, And the questions that they are now struggling with is the word place of laity in the church, place of women. And I say, look, we have struggled with this more than 500 plus years ago, But unfortunately, it seems that we do not cling well to these principles, even in the way we live, If we are priesthood of all believers, everybody's voice should be heard. And this is why one time it is the unproclaimed but lived hierarchy in our churches, unfortunately. It is, we call for this equality, we call for this hierarchical, we call for hearing, but I tell you, there are these dynamics that, we live differently. We speak something, we live something else. And this is why I appreciate what was mentioned. We have to confront things if they want to be changed. And I tell you, the issue of women has been a journey, not an easy journey. But we have to say where it hurts in our churches. And we should not be worried. I know, many times we worry that if we speak, we shake the church. But we come from a tradition of shaking churches. what are we worried, But yes, thank you, because it looks nice, but it's not lived nice. And I tell you, I'm a president of the World Communion of Reformed Churches. Don't think that the equality of women happened. It's a challenge, and this is where, we keep to be faithful to the voice of God in our midst. And this is why being in the continually reforming, it gives us the strength not to be scared to ask questions but yes, thank you. Many times we act like we are really very friendly, but the tables are controlled by few people. Yes, thank you for your question. Yes, thank you. Okay, sorry. There's the microphone there. Okay. Okay. And you'll be next.
It's on.
Yes.
When you were talking about Martha and Mary, I was struck immediately by something that we're doing I have 4 churches. In one of my churches, we have, since COVID, been utterly intentional in offering hospitality of the sort that you were talking about. And so I sometimes feel as though I am a bit of a Mary, in that I am the one who sits at tables with people and listens to them, while there are other people busying themselves in the kitchen doing all the Martha stuff. And actually, now that they have worked that out, it works beautifully. So if Jesus is the person who is in the face and in the person of the person who is in front of me, then like Mary, I am listening to that person. And that is the difference for us now between what we used to think was hospitality and what is real hospitality, because the real hospitality is that people can come in their brokenness, they come on their own, there's always somebody who will sit and listen to them, sit and pray for them, with them, whatever, if necessary, but there's always a listening ear. And the number of people who come on their own, because that's a place where they've found somebody will listen, is just huge now. And the demographic of the church is changing. We've got quite a few new people arriving in church on Sundays. They're utterly different from the normal, in inverted commas, people. Yeah. And it's causing the normal, in inverted commas, people to really, really have to think.
Yes. Same stories.
But it kind of struck me that we have a resource of a whole church where between us we can be Martha and Mary and play our parts equally.
Yes.
And in fact, we now have Kirklees, staff from Kirklees who refer people to us for the things that we do. And there was a lady who turned up last week because she'd asked a policeman where she could go for a cup of tea, where she would be made to feel welcome, and they said, go to the church.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. I want to say, one time I got in touch with a Syrian refugee in Germany. When our young people left, we tried at the beginning through Facebook to follow up with them. And I called him and said, Riyadh, are you fine? He said, yes, I have everything. I have food, I have a house. But he said, I have no meaning. And yesterday, I had the discussion with when I was 2 days before, when I was in Beirut, even the refugees from the Ukraine who are coming here, or the discussion was with a Swiss partner. He said, oh yes, they can move here and have a job and all that. But I said, it's not as easy as you think. You lose the meaning. It's not easy. It's the most difficult experience is to be a refugee. It's the most disruptive experience, I think, to be a refugee. And to check on how they feel about meaning as a person. I think this is why it is how we do hospitality. And when they invite us to their lives, we are shocked. Because what happens with refugees, they close up. They only share things with their friends. But if as a church we could really listen what they're going through, it's the most difficult experience. I hope that On Friday, I will be in Ukraine. And it's mainly to hear the stories of our churches, not reports. To be with the people, to hear about their fears. And I tell you, as a Middle Eastern woman, I grew with the tradition that my father has kept a bag where he put our passports, he put our, the documents for ownership of our house, the keys, the bank, has always been in a bag, because during the war, we thought that at any time we could leave. I didn't have the experience of leaving it, but I always had the threat that this could happen to me. And I feel very much with the people of Ukraine. Children, who will heal them from this experience? The fear that they see in their parents, saying goodbye for their fathers who have to stay there. Who would heal? This is why, as a person who lived in the Middle East, war doesn't solve problems. It just brings more violence and indignity and hurt for the people. I really pray that there could be some kind of a resolution, a peace resolution, because I lived in war from 1974 till 1990, and even now, and we discovered it's all loss. Nobody gains. And you know what? The humanity loses in that. So they are in our prayer. Yes, can we have the microphone there, please?
Nadia, really interesting what you were saying, and absolutely it makes so much sense, in the sense we should be focusing on hospitality, and that's all the way through the Bible, and agree. My question is, you used Mary and Martha as your example, which is a brilliant example for hospitality, but at the end of the day, I think Jesus very much describes the better way, because he says that Mary's way is the better way, and that way is very much sitting at Jesus' feet. So the focus of that is, whatever Martha's doing, whether that's great, brilliant, and I'm sure Jesus wanted him to be there, because after all, he wanted to be fed. But actually, he's saying clearly that sitting at my feet, at Jesus' feet, is the better way. That's the way to focus our lives. That's the way to live. That's the way. So how would you feed all that into feed? I didn't mean that.
Yeah.
How would you connect all
reconcile
that with
that?
Yeah, because that's important, isn't it?
Yes.
It's really, really good.
Yeah. We always, when we study, this is the first time I read the text through the eyes of hospitality on Martha. And I think, we always need Marthas and Marys. The church that's only Marys is meaningless. And the church that's only Martha becomes an NGO with just a social club. I think we need both. We need both in that. But this is the question, is every time we're doing something, we need this spirituality to keep asking, what are we doing? Does it really meet the people life? Does it impact them? Does it change them? Do they feel loved? We are coming out of COVID. We want therapy for love. Because with the distancing, with this, and I always say the church should be a place of love and joy after COVID. It's a way of this. So yes, we need both. And I know that Jesus did not lift Martha up, because in our eyes, we think Martha is the better one because she was active, in this. But it's both models, because every time the church gets Marthaean, the church has to be Marian. Sit down, reflect, see, does this look like Christ? And I tell you, in Lebanon, we have lots of NGOs now. Every now and then we have, as a church, to say what we are doing and why we are doing it. Sometimes we are proud that we are doing things, but to ask that what spirit we do things. is what makes a difference. This is why connecting with the people, respecting them, hearing them. And, you know, in these tables, we gain new spirituality. But just to hear the pain of the people. I think if one of us have received a Ukrainian family in his or her house, they will be changed drastically. They have lots of faith questions. And I think these opportunities, they challenge us as a church to try to answer again, what does the Lord require from us? This is the question we ask ourselves, why aren't we have all this theology, we have the resources, we have everything, why aren't we impactful? And you know, we struggle with that. The question is that, is what we are doing giving people the love of Christ, the better life of Christ or not? And because we have a history of legacy, you know, in the Middle East, we were the first to teach women in the whole Ottoman Empire. Wow. But now, what are we doing? This is the challenge that we have, to live in the present, to thank God for the past, but live in the present. And sometimes our partners say, tell us what you're doing now. We are very proud of the history, and that's great, but that's not enough. We are called to be that. As a communion, we have the same struggle. It's a strong communion. Now what are we doing? And God is shaping us anew. This COVID experience was a shaking experience that we feel we have to start from the beginning, to lay the things differently. And I think this meeting is a special table. If we are able to open up, to trust one another, to be humble in front of the Lord and say, Lord, what do you want from our church today? Am I living hospitality? Am I a hospitable person? And how would God use me for changing the world around me? Lots of needs around us, and I think this is an opportunity that we get changed.
Thank you so much for what you've said to us. I don't know that we were recording you as president of the Reformed Communion saying we need to be more of a Marian church. That very welcome from some of us, but I think that might not be universally welcome. Thank you so much for what you've said. And from the context from which you speak is incredibly humbling, because any of us that have sat at table with you for meals, just for you to drop in when I was in Damascus, ... not name dropping, but incredibly need place dropping in front of us. Thank you so much. We must be hospitable around tables to eat now.
Yes,
let you go to the front of the queue, and we return for 1:45 for the next session. Punctually, please. Thank you.